And welcome into today's episode of the Blanket Coverage Podcast. Today, we are only talking about college football. We are going to transition to 2 episodes a week rather than just one because last time was 2.5 hours. Not 2.5 hours, it was 2 hours. And we just simply don't have enough time to talk about both sports in one podcast and really give you the full deep dive that you look for when you listen to the Blanket Coverage Podcast. But we are going to fire off some piping hot college football takes today. We have winners and losers as well as the Agony Olympics. As always, I am joined by my co-host Jack Wallace. Jack, how are we doing?
Doing pretty good. It's always a good day to be talking about some college football coming up. NFL, we're moving to tomorrow, as you said, with those 2 episodes. We're going to split those up because we saw it was around 2 hours, and I was like, that's a while. We don't have all that time. So we're going to be pushing that to do 2 a day. It's going to, or sorry, two different ones over 2 days, which is going to be super helpful with the NFL being on Thursday. So we're going to have a little section of that sort of tying into Thursday Night Football. We know we used to do a big old preview episode last year. But that was just a huge amount of content twice. We're just trying to cut a little down on that. And honestly, with the previews, we kind of talk about that anyway in the recaps, looking at all these teams. So it all gets in either way. So I think it's a lot better of a process. It'll be easier on the viewers because you have a lot less time to just sit down and watch in a row. So it's easier to digest the episodes. I know we go through a lot of content, but it's a lot of fun content. And this week, that will certainly be true again. But we're going to start things right off with our college football week 3 recap. We're going to go through MLB stuff tomorrow in front of the NFL, simply because with MLB, there's not really a reason to do it 2 days in a row. But there are a lot of interesting updates to the playoffs, so we will get to that tomorrow. But to start off, again, we're going to go through our winners. We're going to go through our losers as we've been doing. And to start off with my winners, and again, all of these can be looked at on GTD Sports on their blog site. I'm one of the most recent blogs up. I wrote this yesterday on Tuesday. Today is Wednesday, September 22nd. So I wrote that yesterday. Go check it out. But time to dive into a little bit more. And my first winner here is the Wolverine and Spartan State of Michigan. This state, with all their teams in it, did very, very well this weekend.
What is Michigan the state actually called?
It actually is called the Wolverine State. Is one. There are multiple names that it has, but the Wolverine State is one of them. I just threw in Spartan because Michigan State was probably the biggest team of the weekend here. Yeah, go Sparty though. And it was pretty good overall. These Michigan teams showed up pretty strong. And, I mean, the first one of these I'll highlight is Michigan State because we did know, and I know you of all people knew, that Miami was fraudulent. We all knew. We said it for a while. We knew they weren't good. But for this game, I think it's more that Michigan State actually is a pretty decent team. And people were just really sleeping on them this year because every year for the last half decade, which can't believe it's been that long since Michigan State's been good, but everyone's always said, oh, it's the same old Michigan State. But they've looked pretty good this season. They haven't played really, really good opponents yet, and they will later. They will. But they look pretty solid so far. I got to give them credit.
Well, let me just say this. The program at Michigan State was left in shambles when Mark D'Antonio left in January, which if you know anything about the timeline of college football, that's not when you want to leave your program. That typically happens right after the year. But they had a tough time on the coaching carousel because Mark D'Antonio left so late in the year. There was a bunch of mess with recruiting. And I mean, really props to this program for getting back on top here and getting a big win against Miami, who had to throw the ball 60 times in this game. That's how little they were able to run the ball at all. And I'm not going to blame De'Aaron King that they had to throw the ball 60 times. I mean, he had 59 passing attempts, 338 yards. He actually averaged 6.6 yards per attempt, but did throw 2 interceptions. But I mean, you throw the ball 59 times in college, you're probably going to get a pick or 2 in there for sure. But the big headline is they just could not run the ball against Michigan State whatsoever. Only 52 yards on 24 rushing attempts and no touchdowns for Miami. So they actually won the game in terms of first downs, but the turnover battle, they lost 2 fumbles, had 2 interceptions to Michigan State's 0, and that was really the difference in the game.
And I got to shout out here Peyton Thorne, quarterback out of Michigan State, 726 yards in the season with 9 touchdowns, 0 picks, and an 85.0 QBR. That's 7th best in the country. He threw for 4 touchdowns and 261 yards this week without much trouble at all. And if you're talking about some guys that are some of those low-key, really good Big Ten players we have not talked about, Peyton Thorne's one of them. This quarterback's been absolutely balling this year, putting up fantastic numbers. I mean, that's 9 touchdowns and 0 picks in 3 games. That's about the best you can ask for out of a college quarterback. So I'm really excited to see where he goes. And next week's coming up, Michigan State plays Nebraska, Western Kentucky at Rutgers. And then after that's at Indiana, which is a very winnable game. So that's a really strong start.
Michigan State.
Well, but then the end of their schedule, after that's Michigan.
7-0.
On Halloween weekend against Michigan.
I mean, that's not a guaranteed loss. We know how wild that game gets sometimes. Throwback to the Joe Tessitore punt call where Joe Tessitore had a stroke at the end of the game on that.
Oh, yeah. And the last 2, that's very true. But the last 2 games of their season are at Ohio State and then Penn State back-to-back. Penn State is at home, but that's about as tough as you can get back-to-back. So very intrigued to see how those games turn out with a team that really I wasn't quite sure of how they're going to be preseason, but impressed me. So look at the rest of Michigan, just to mention for a little bit Michigan and themselves, the Big Blue. Now, they beat a Northern Illinois team that's pretty bad, and we know this because they beat Georgia Tech, and you got to be even – if you beat Georgia Tech, that doesn't give you a very big boost to how good you are, but then they turned around and they lost to Wyoming by 7, allowing 50 against Wyoming. And usually good teams don't allow Wyoming to put up 50 on you. And Michigan put up 63 on NIU, not very big. But the kicker here was Michigan moved from number 25 all the way up to number 19, which a 6-point jump
they weren't
right there.
Preseason top 10, even though they haven't had that much success as of late. But we should mention, and I want to mention here while we're talking about these two teams have the number 1 and 3 respective top rushers in the country. Kenneth Walker III had a huge game against Miami. He has
he's always doing
493 yards on the year, averaging 8.5 yards a carry. And then Blake Corum from Michigan, he is number 3 with 407 yards, still averaging 8.5 yards a carry. So these two teams really able to run it. And we know that Michigan has had a lot of problems throwing the ball, especially against some of the better competition they faced. Even against Washington, they didn't have a great day throwing the football, but they were able to run it all over them. So that's Big Ten football, which we'll get to later because Big Ten football is definitely here to stay. Let's see some more running game. I love running game. I love it when colleges can't pass. I love watching the service academies who can't throw to save their lives, and they just run the ball the entire game. It's so much fun to watch.
Well, speaking of a game that ended up having a whole lot of interceptions through it, now there were some decent passing, but there were some pretty solid run game too in this one. But leading into your first winner, let's take a look at some late night Pac-12 action.
Oh, don't get ahead of me now.
I'm saying take a look at it. There you go. Go on. There's your lead in. There's your tag.
My first winner of the week are the Mormons. Because BYU, we talked about it last week, and we talked about it in the preview. We've actually talked a lot about BYU this year. No one expected anything out of this team. They lost Zach Wilson. They lost a ton of other older talent from that team, and they are still absolutely cooking. They went down in a barn burner against ASU, and Arizona State came into Provo, and they were able to come away with the win. So that's huge for the Mormons. And we all thought with this schedule this year, with the schedule being different, because last year they had to schedule a bunch of lesser teams in order to fill their schedule as an independent, because all of these conferences with COVID we're playing conference-only schedules. We're not playing non-conference schedules. And we thought, well, this is going to be a lot tougher. They have a lot less talent this year. They look like they are on an absolute mission, and I can't tell you how good of a coaching job this has been.
Absolutely. No, it's really to see BYU lose a guy like Zach Wilson and still do what they're doing. And I know it's early. We know it's only 3-0, which is still great to be 3-0. But that's the other thing is that's 3-0 against Pac-12 teams. All 3 games against Pac-12 teams. And I get Arizona's not good. But Utah was pretty good. Arizona State's pretty good. And those are 2 big wins. And next up, they have South Florida, who's horrible. Utah State with another one of the another rare trophy you may not know. But do you actually know what the trophy is between Utah, BYU, and Utah State? It's a 3-team thing, like the Commander's Trophy for the Naval and Air Force and Army. There's a term for it.
Smith Cup or something?
No, it's the Beehive Trophy.
Why?
Because Utah is really big for bees. If you didn't know that, but yeah, bees in Utah are like a really big thing. In fact, Salt Lake City's AAA team is the Salt Lake Bees. So bees are really big in Utah. So the Beehive Trophy is always a fun thing to sort of watch. But I'm a big fan of it since I enjoy sort of weird, fun Utah things. But the Beehive, the boot too. There's the Beehive boot. Sorry, yeah, Beehive boot. It's a little giant boot.
Shout out to Mitt Romney's son, Baylor Romney. For getting a pass attempt in this game. 100% on the day, 100% completion percentage, 1 for 1, 3 yards.
Good for him.
It's just great.
Yeah, but Romney connects with Rex with the ice on the game for ESPN.
I was never super high on Arizona State to begin the year. I'm not sure why they were ranked. I think they were just ranked because, people bought into the hype of Jaden Daniels. They bought into the hype of what Herm Edwards has been doing with this program. But if you look really at what Herm Edwards has been doing with this program, they haven't really been winning a ton of games. It was more of an upside play, if anything, and I'm not sure why they were really favored in this game. Having watched BYU against Utah last week and now against Arizona State this week, there was no reason that Arizona State should have been favored in this game.
And let me just mention before we move on, but just to look at the other schedule for BYU, because being independent and being a fun independent, I love looking at what they end up playing. I mentioned the next 2 games, but then after that is BSU at home, Boise State going to BYU, always a great game there. Then at Baylor in an odd Big 12 matchup. Then at Washington State, Virginia, Idaho State, at Georgia Southern, and then at USC. So a pretty odd schedule there, but that's a lot of winnable games. That's a lot of winnable games in that schedule. BYU could, I don't know if they'll run the table with that, but they may be better than most of all those teams. And now I get some of those are tricky. Some may be weird. I mean, Utah State and Utah, that's always a weird kind of trio of how they work with rivalry. At USC, last game of the week is going to be difficult. We know that USC is not all they're hyped up to be, but that is still a hard game to play last game of the year. And you never know being at Baylor because Baylor's looked good so far, but hasn't really played anybody, which tends to be the Baylor way. But I'm still very confused, actually, my thoughts on Baylor. I know we won't really talk about them too much today, but if they continue to beat anyone decent, then that may be it. But kind of interesting seeing how some of these sort of funny non-con schedules will start. But moving on to my second winner.
Which is also my second winner.
Yeah, so we can kind of pair this up for this one. But this is a guy that I was pretty high on preseason. I actually really didn't talk about him a lot in the college football preview, and only because I wasn't totally sold on the Ole Miss defense yet. But it turns out they've looked not perfect, but they've had some pretty good moments. Landshark defense looks like it's coming back with a second-half shutout against Tulane, and the highlight player here is Matt Corral, a player who has been blowing up big time, is actually number 1 in the Heisman odds right now. He was 23 for 31, 335 yards and 3 touchdowns, including a touchdown rush too, so 4 on the day entirely. And this Ole Miss offense is ridiculous. 61 points put on Tulane, and we get that it's Tulane, but Tulane's a 1-2 team that, they could be 2-1 because they almost beat OU.
Yeah, they had to go to Norman. And what was actually supposed to be a home game for them.
I really think that Tulane can actually have a pretty decent schedule this year. Now, they do have to play Houston and Cincinnati and at UCF. It's a pretty hard schedule for American Conference standards. They do have to play most of the hard teams there. But
so they have to play 2 Big 12 teams, 3 Big 12 teams.
That's true. But I I don't know. I think Tulane could beat a good chunk of teams. I think they may upset somebody this year. And I think Ole Miss beating them, I don't think is a knock on Tulane. I think that's more saying that Ole Miss, in my opinion, I think that you could argue, maybe that you could argue they're the third best team in the SEC right now. I'm not sure. Florida, I get they were good and lost this weekend, so maybe they're fourth, but I wouldn't put them anywhere lower than fourth.
The way that Bama's defense played against a Florida offense that couldn't really pass very well, and we'll get to that game, but I think Ole Miss has a decent chance at beating Bama, and I think they have a beyond decent chance. I think they have a good chance to beat Bama.
I don't think that's a crazy take. I really don't, and I feel like I would have thought that was.
If there is anyone that can figure out a Nick Saban defense, especially one that gave up 29 points to Emory Jones, who I don't think is necessarily a good passer of the football, and now you have to look at Matt Corral, who is not only this team's rushing leader, but he's also the passing leader, and I believe he is the national passing leader right now, and an Ole Miss offense that is putting up a national best 52.7 points a game. Bama is on serious upset alert.
This Ole Miss team is very, very impressive, and I think it's been really, really fun to watch them play. My mom is an Ole Miss grad, so for me personally, I really enjoy it. I've been a fan of Ole Miss for quite some time, so I always love to see them doing well, but yeah, they're an impressive team. And again, them being number 17 at the time of their win, I think moving up to 13 was totally fair. But I mean, Ole Miss is playing like a top 10 team right now. If I'm going to be honest, like look at how Clemson is playing right now and look at how Ole Miss is playing. And who do you think is a better team?
Ole Miss, without a doubt.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. Some of the polls, I think the pollsters, because Clemson's number 9 right now, they dropped 3 spots. We'll talk about the Georgia Tech game in a minute. But Clemson dropping 3 spots, I think was fair. But do we really think Clemson's a top 10 team? I don't think so. I mean, they haven't proven anything to be a top 10 team whatsoever. And even the Georgia loss wasn't really that bad of a loss, but they sort of were like putzing around, not doing much. And then the Tech win is really where it starts to scare me with this team, because you see a team that really couldn't score anything on Georgia. And then we realized Georgia a few weeks later, like, oh, okay, their defense really is that good. But then they score 14 points on Georgia Tech, with one of those touchdowns being one that's really late in the game, and then you had the whole crazy ending, and we'll get to that. I'm sort of skipping ahead, but I'm losing some faith on them. So back to Ole Miss, it's just I think 13's a little low. You see Notre Dame, Florida, Ohio State, Clemson ahead of them, and I think Ole Miss could compete with all of those teams and maybe better than a good chunk of those teams. So I'm excited to see where they go up, because they will be continuing to move up if they keep playing like this.
Absolutely. Well, they are only 66th in strength of schedule. So their schedule has not been great as of late, but this is a Louisville team that was able to come out and cook UCF and Gus Malzahn. We'll talk about that.
That's true. That's true.
And
good point.
That win against Louisville in the opening week is looking better and better by the minute. And this is a team that also is only giving up 20.7 points a game. That is far better than they were playing last year when they couldn't defend anybody. And they were just having barn burners every single game. I think I might pick them over Bama. And my second winner this week to go along with this point is the Lane train. Because Lane Kiffin is absolutely killing it. And we've talked a little bit already. We've talked a lot already about this Ole Miss team and the game last weekend. But I do want to talk about Lane Kiffin a little bit, because what would you think about Lane Kiffin going back to USC? Now, I'm not predicting it to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. But it would be the most Lane Kiffin thing ever to get fired from USC on the tarmac and then end up going back and being the golden boy of the USC program.
I just know that even with him doing as well as he can with Ole Miss, he would have to win a dang national title for USC to say come back. And I don't know if that's happening with Ole Miss as much as I would love. Oh my God, to see Ole Miss in the playoffs would make my year. But it's going to take an absurd amount, because, yeah, as we know, it's like USC clearly left that on not great terms. So, I mean, I know it wouldn't make, but if you're talking about purely for the sake of the fun of it, I mean, of course I'd love to see that. I think that'd be a fun time.
Yeah.
Ole Miss has turned into an incredibly entertaining, fun team that people want to root for and like and are good. I mean, they prove it. They win these big games. And we know last year they were dogged endlessly for the defense being bad. But, I mean, when you outscore every team by at least, by 20 points, 40 points, 40 points, I mean, who cares that your defense isn't doing as great? And even they aren't even bad either. I mean, Tulane scored 0 in the second half. I mean, Louisville proved to be very solid on offense against UCF, and they only scored 24 on Ole Miss. So it's, I don't know. I think that could be a big difference maker there in what this Ole Miss team can do again further on in the season. But we can move on now. We got Fresno State up next as my last winner, and not necessarily Fresno State, but their New Year's 6 odds, because we all got to always find who's going to be that team to sort of shoot up and be great. We know that was Coastal Carolina last year, and yeah, they're still winning and doing well. We have barely talked about Coastal Carolina at all, mostly because they haven't played anybody. And to be frank, they don't really play many decent teams over the season. But in fact, they actually don't play Louisiana Lafayette, the only sort of big team from the Sun Belt. So yeah, not a lot from Coastal Carolina, and barely beat Buffalo in kind of a weird game, but. Fresno State may be that team. This Fresno State Bulldog team has been very, very impressive this season, and their biggest game of the year was against UCLA. And yeah, Fresno State beat Connecticut by 1 billion, barely lost to Oregon in a really impressive game, which that loss is aging really well for for Fresno State. Beat Cal Poly by 1,000, and then played UCLA and was the better team. 40-37 was your final, and yeah, Fresno State was really good. Jake Hayner looked fantastic in this game, too. I mean,
did you watch the end of that game?
I did not know.
This game was absolutely electric. So Jake Hayner on the last drive of the game, or maybe it might have been the second to last drive. I think it was.
No, it was with 18. It was with 18 seconds to go.
Well, Jake Hayner before the last drive takes a huge hit and delivers a touchdown to I believe I can't remember exactly what the score was. My timeline of that game is fuzzy. It was late at night. But Jake Hayner took a massive hit, took a helmet right to the hip, and
got it right here.
Comes back, limps down the field, and drives his team all the way down for a go-ahead touchdown. He was absolutely phenomenal. He had no mobility in the pocket and was still able to deliver a touchdown, deliver lightning throws.
You're seeing it. You're seeing it right here, right? I'm playing it.
Yeah.
I'll play the replays coming up, but yeah. I mean, look at him.
Deliver lightning throws. Look, he can't really put his hip into that throw at all. These are all arm throws. And this kid played absolutely lights out in the last few minutes of that game. Could not give him any more credit because he willed that team to a win with some darts. And I mean, it was 2 drives in a row. They hit that little back shoulder pylon throw, and the pylon was open for really the entire game. And I don't know where Jack has gone. We'll see if we can get Jack back in here. All right, there we go. Jack.
Hey, so that my whole Google Chrome just turned off. So.
Oh, you gotta love when that happens.
Goodness
I was
gracious.
getting some unstable internet symbols, so I didn't know if that might have been it.
That was a little odd. Sorry about that.
What the issue was, but as you said, Fresno State, just a massive, massive win. And yeah, you're right. If they can win out the rest of the year, that's going to be huge for them making the New Year's 6. This might be one of the best group of 5 teams in the country for sure. But let's move on because I have one more winner from this week. And for the 3rd consecutive week, Big Ten football is a winner because Penn State brought some Big Ten football to Auburn on Saturday night. That was just an incredible game. What a scene.
It was.
What a
Yeah.
scene with the whiteout. If that doesn't put chills down your spine, you might not be a college football fan. Can we talk about that goal line fade? Because I will talk about Auburn in a little bit more in depth as we go along here. But can we talk about that goal line fade? Because what on earth is the Auburn play caller doing, calling a goal line fade on 4th down, and Bo Nix airmails it to the cheerleaders?
I don't know. I mean,
That's
this
not
Auburn
SEC
team is
football.
It's not. And this Auburn team had times where they look very solid, but times like that were just sort of confusing. And I get that it's the whiteout. I get that it's very difficult to do much at Penn State for that game too. And I mean, Nix had 185 yards, no scores. But I think it's also clear that Bo Nix is no longer the star offensive playmaker of this team. I mean, that's Tank Bigsby's role now. 102 yards and 2 carries on 102 yards and 2 touchdowns on 23 carries. So it's still, he's the workhorse of this team. And it was a close game the whole time. I mean, it was very, very back and forth. Auburn did only have the lead for a short amount of time in the first quarter and then a good chunk of the second quarter, but never actually held it at all in the fourth. Was able to come back on 10 straight points to bring it to a 1-point game, but Noah Kane, another solid 3-yard run, is what sealed the deal with about 10:48 to go. So yeah, no one scored for quite a while after that. But
second, I'd like to go to point number 2 because I had a few different things that I wanted to talk about with Big Ten football being a winner for 3 weeks in a row. How about the Nebraska Cornhuskers? And I know they totally choked this game in a million different ways, but Spencer Rattler was kind of atrocious. And Nebraska sitting at 2-2, we all wrote this team off at the beginning of the year. They lost to Illinois, of all teams. And I don't know whether this says more about Nebraska or about Oklahoma, but this Nebraska team fought hard. Only one turnover on the game. Taylor Martinez was able to pass for 76%. And I'd like to make another point here that whoever said the Oklahoma defense is supposed to be fixed this year was an outright liar, because the Oklahoma DBs have been garbage for about 10 years now, and nothing has changed. This team would still get 70 dropped on their head by any playoff team.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty true here. I was at least excited as someone that loves the weird rules of college football that we actually did have the very rare 2-point safety here, which you don't see often. But we did get to see a 2-point safety, which if you're confused about how a 2-point safety works, you have to block the extra point attempt and return it for a touchdown. And that gives you technically not a touchdown, but 2 points back for you. So that's what made it 9-16, which is always very odd. But yeah, sort of a funny scoreline on that end that Oklahoma was able to get. A 23-16 is a very odd score, but yeah, I mean, still 384 yards for Nebraska, 1 turnover. I mean, it's not exactly great, but yeah, OU's a little odd too. I mean, for Oklahoma, that's 408 yards and 0 turnovers, and you're still only putting up 23 points. I mean,
you cannot be happy if you're an OU fan with this performance, because Nebraska, let's face it, they missed 2 field goals, and they make those 2 field goals, and this is basically a tie ball game. With 1 more point, not counting that little 2-point play. So yeah, this was almost a tie ball game. Very close call for Oklahoma at home against a team that lost to Illinois.
Yeah, if you're Oklahoma, you have 9 drives in this game and only 3 resulted in touchdowns, and 1 was a mixed field goal. But even then, that's not good enough. That's just not good enough. And so, yeah, if you're Oklahoma, you need to be better. I mean, yes, it was good enough to win today, and a win is a win at the end of the day. So they are 3-0. This would have been catastrophic for a loss. But after this, which is what I'm excited about, is after this week, Big 12 play starts for pretty much everybody. If not, I think it is everyone. I'm pretty sure everyone does have it left. And it's Oklahoma, West Virginia. And that's a losable game. West Virginia played really well this weekend.
Don't forget TCU, Texas,
which is 11 a.m., which is very disappointing. 11 a.m. for you,
that's
noon
a
for me.
Crime against humanity. I will actually be at the game, and I was
wish I could be
very sad to find out that I will be tailgating at 8 a.m. instead of noon. So that's going to be a little rough. Get a little Bailey's in your coffee. Get ready to go.
I'm going to be driving to Cleveland and going to a Cleveland Indians game. And I'm going to an Indians game in their final series of being Indians. So I wanted to see them before they changed to Guardians because I also wanted to see Guardians too. So I was like, I want to see both. So this is literally the only chance I could ever do that. So I was like, might as well.
Let's talk about some losers. Let's get negative. Let's bring the negative vibes in. We had the good vibes. Let's bring in the negative vibes. Jack, give me your first loser.
Well, my first loser here is a loser that really disappointed me this weekend. And now part of it was teams that I expected to lose, and some I didn't. And this kind of goes off your Mormons points. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but Arizona State really fell flat. And they were a team that I had a good amount of hype in, and not like crazy or anything. But I did think this team could make some serious damage. And so far, they've looked pretty good. But then they played BYU, and to me, I'm still going to be on the side of I think that BYU really is legit and Arizona State isn't a fraud. It's just that BYU is really good, and that was underestimated in the polls. So that's at least my take still, but we'll obviously see how that take ages in a few weeks. But also on them, Arizona, and this one is a kind of a Pain Olympics preview, but Arizona lost to Northern Arizona, which is never a good thing.
Arizona also, fun fact, has the nation's longest losing streak.
And it got capped off by Northern Arizona. The starting quarterback of Northern Arizona, in his winning game, 11 for 16, 88 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. And he won. Now, to be fair, the running back, Kevin Daniels, did absolutely whatever he wanted. But Will Plummer, in his start for Arizona, 19 for 34, 191 yards, 1 TD, and 2 picks against Northern Arizona. This was the free game that you paid them to come play, and that's what you give up. And even worse, it was 13-0. Arizona had a 13-0 lead against this team. It was, and with 2 minutes to go in the first half, was 13-0. And then with 2 minutes to go in the second half, 21-13 Northern Arizona.
I think we can all agree that Kevin Sumlin is absolutely nothing without Cliff Kingsbury on the sideline next to him.
Absolutely nothing. And that's proven very strong here. Arizona's a disaster for the program. And yeah, the winner in Arizona this weekend was Northern Arizona. So congrats to the Lumberjacks.
The winner. The winner. The singular winner in the state of Arizona.
So yeah, that's not too much on Arizona, but just wanted
to Arizona.
I guess the inverse of a shout out, but not too good of a weekend.
Well, my first loser are the losers plural, because they both fall under this category. The agents of chaos, as I have dubbed them, which is Gus Malzahn, who loves to create chaos, and sometimes chaos, it goes against you a little bit, because this game was tied. UCF had a chance to drive down and seal the deal. In fact, I bet on UCF not once but twice. I live bet them during the game as well. Was watching this live, and what do you know? Pick six. And if that's not a Gus Malzahn ending to lose to Louisville, who I don't think we thought was going to be very good to start this season off, I don't know what is. This is a Gus Malzahn absolute masterpiece, absolute masterclass in losing in chaotic fashion, as he won in chaotic fashion so many times at Auburn. But I'm not so convinced, and this is I guess it's a very deep analytical take. The bad karma of UCF trying to claim a national championship, and the bad karma of just Gus Malzahn in general, after all the wild, crazy plays. Are we not convinced that he sold his soul for the kick six?
First point, they did win a national championship. And secondly, they did. And secondly, yeah, I think he did sell his soul for the kick six. And don't forget about the winning Georgia.
Yes, they did. National championship.
Yes, they did. Because the problem is that national championships have absolutely nothing to do with solely the college football playoff. That is a national championship. It is not the national championship because the AP poll and the coaches poll, all of those are national championships. There's no system.
Not now.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
It was before the BCS.
No, that's still how it works. You can look it up. That's exactly how it works. So if you get an accredited NCAA poll to give you a national championship, you have complete right to claim that it is.
Well,
that's how it works, which is nonsense. It's nonsense.
Whatever poll ranked UCF number 1 should not be accredited anymore. I think they lose.
Which sure,
credibility.
Trust me. I'm not saying that it was the silliest thing ever and it's ridiculous, but the way the rules work in the NCAA is the NCAA themselves does not give a national title to anyone. The only people that do are polls. So the Crystal Ball Trophy, that's still a thing. That didn't go away. We just don't see that anymore because it's not the headliner trophy. But all these other teams, you still get the Crystal Ball because that's the coach's trophy. So that never went away, which people forget is that wasn't a BCS thing.
All I'm saying is UCF, you don't want Bama. You really don't.
They don't.
Let me tell you right now, you do not want Bama.
No. Again, I'm not saying that it's I more make that argument or more just sort of state the fact they did because it is silly. It is a dumb system. It makes no sense that the polls determine all of that, and that's how it works. But that's just how it works. The polls determine everything. That's how college football functions. It's very weird. There should be a standard for it. There should be just one winner. But it's mostly the point now that college football playoff is done is it's basically reined in all of the polls to say we are all going to unanimously pick this team and there's going to be no argument. And that's the reason why it's always one team every year. But if polls decided to break off, there's nothing holding them to that. And they can do that if they want to. It's just very rarely it happens. And that's why UCF had like one poll. Like technically there was a poll, an accredited poll that gave TCU the 2010 national title. We chose to not take it. We said no. And so then TCU didn't get the national title. Like they didn't accept it. So there's unclaimed national titles and there's claimed
champions.
Ish.
We're arguing about technicalities.
Well, but that's how it works. It's just what poll are you going to say is the most important, and it is arbitrary. We have decided that the AP poll and the coaches poll are the biggest two, and that's the ones we follow. It isn't like FCS or like any other NCAA sport or any pro sport where you just win the most games and the league gives you the trophy and then the argument's over. The NCAA doesn't touch anything. It's all polls, which again, I think is dumb, but that's how the system works. That's how it's always worked. It should change, but I don't know if it will. But that's my poll spiel.
Speaking of things that are dumb, the agent of chaos number 2, Auburn football. We already covered this game a little bit, but Auburn football, big loser this weekend. Had to go into Happy Valley. And I mean, they put up a valiant effort. The Auburn defense, I thought, actually played pretty well, aside from giving up wide open passes and touchdowns to Sean Clifford pretty much whenever he wanted to do it. But they did a good job of stuffing the run, I guess. Here's the thing. I'm using the Auburn as an agent of chaos, Monquier, as long as humanly possible, because there is no guarantee that Auburn will be an agent of chaos anymore. I think they might just be average under Brian Harsin.
And that's which is a very sad level of truth, because I know the agent of chaos with Auburn was always a good tie we had, always we could depend on.
The most fun thing ever, the Gus Malzahn and Auburn, it was just the perfect stew of chaos.
That's a good way to put that. But I can move on to my next loser that is also a stew of chaos, and that's just the entire ACC. The ACC continues to be a chaotic, wild mess, which a good wild mess, I think, is a way to describe it.
This year, can I just
they are bad.
Deep analytical take from me.
Yeah,
the ACC.
So so that's why we're going to go over just a little bit of ACC in this play, which is also going to tie into a little bit of another little bit of Pain Olympic preview. I'm not going to go too much in it because I want to devote some at least a 5-minute segment to that. But biggest loser here is not just ACC teams, but ranked ACC teams. So I wanted to make a point of that. And the first one we already talked about, so we're not going to mention much. Miami, obviously on this list for flopping yet again to an unranked team. That's a good unranked team and now a ranked team deservingly, but you still flopped. It was still a home game. You got to win that, or at least be competitive. And a lot of the game they were not. Next up, Virginia Tech. You had the great start. You looked really good. And then you played West Virginia, and it was a 6-point loss. But West Virginia was in control of the game pretty much the whole time until the ending, where Virginia Tech should have won the game and somehow blew it. It was, oh my God, this game was ridiculous because with like 20 seconds left, Virginia Tech got the ball back at the West Virginia like 20-yard line. And then they ran the ball, and got down to the 4, first and goal at the 4, and went 3 and out. West Virginia wins by 6. And it's like, yeah, you can't do that. You're ranked 15th in the country.
Is undefeated. College football
that's not
undefeated.
NFL, that doesn't happen. That
does not happen in the NFL.
That does not happen. That does not happen. And unlike most of my friends up here in the North, I still will forever ride or die college football. And it's stuff like that that's fun. And now I get there's things in college football that are – I'm always college football over NFL. The pageantry, the heart, the passion, it's like nothing else, and I love it.
I'm a fan of good football.
It's still good football. It's entertaining football is the difference. NFL can be very good football, but not all the time is it. And I was on Red Zone the last couple of weeks, and I've watched a crazy amount of NFL the last few weeks, and I still love it, mind you. I still love the NFL. I have nothing but love for it. But a lot of the time, a lot of those games, I was like, I could have not watched that. And fantasy is like 60% of the reason why I watch as many games as I do, which is still fun. But I love fantasy too. But hey, again,
it also doesn't help that the Falcons are bad. I don't.
Oh no, that's made me. If you were a Falcons fan, you would also think a lot more like me, I think, because your life would be way more painful. As much as I know it's not the most joyous as a Titans fan, but you still have been like. Not completely embarrassed your team on every single year's occasion. But anyway, another team that actually did embarrass themselves, despite winning, was Clemson. And you are a loser this week, Clemson, even though you won the game because Georgia Tech –
moral loser.
Georgia Tech is a really bad football team, but they genuinely looked pretty decent in this game. And I don't think that's just because Clemson looked bad, but I think Tech actually looked impressive in this game. And Dabo Swinney had a whole thing about Tech being impressive in this game, and I think he was right. Because Jordan Yates is clearly the better quarterback for Georgia Tech. He's proven it so far, had a pretty solid game despite an interception. Jahmyr Gibbs actually got shut down. He was one of the players that was supposed to be a big-time breakout ACC running back at Tech, which really hasn't done a lot. But Clemson looked terrible in this game. DJ Uiagalelei looked lost at times, only 126 yards and no scores. But Will Shipley got it done on the ground with a couple of scores. But the ending of this game was insane because with 8 minutes left to go, it was 14-3. Clemson looked like they put the game away. Georgia Tech drove down the field and elected to go for a field goal, which I was mad at. I said we should go for it, but we made the field goal. I was like, fine, it's a one-score game. We go for the onside kick, and we get it. And I was like, okay. Tech went driving down, got all the way to the goal line, and was stuffed. And then the next play, Clemson gets a safety. And so then Tech gets 2 more points on the board and the ball back. That was with 7 seconds left, so it ended up being a Hail Mary that was nothing. But Tech made it a really close competitive game where it should not have been. And at this point, Clemson's number 9. They keep sinking down. We talked about this earlier, but I don't think Clemson's going to make the playoffs because the rest of their schedule is really, really easy. It's really easy. And the 2 out-of-conference games you play left are South Carolina and UConn, who are a pretty bad SEC team and a horrific independent. And then the rest of your ACC schedule, it's not hard. So I don't know. And they, especially given the Coastal's falling apart too, like I don't know how Clemson's odds are now.
Clemson's moving down the rankings too. They're currently ranked 9th. Now we'll see if the playoff committee, knowing them, will probably rank them like number 3, just based on quality losses. They always just make up. They just make up stuff. They just make up.
That's true. It's true.
Like,
it's
they haven't beaten anybody, but they have a quality loss. They have a better quality loss than any other team who's lost, including the teams who haven't lost.
So yay for you, Clemson, for quality losses.
Clemson will probably make the playoff based on the fact that they had a more quality loss than a group of 5 team that didn't lose.
Honestly,
if that makes negative sense.
If it wasn't for the college football playoff squad being so favorable for the SEC, with what I've seen out of the Big Ten, you could make an argument that the Big Ten's got multiple playoff teams right now. I know you have Alabama, Georgia
as a winner for 2 years. For 3 weeks in a row.
And I get Alabama, Georgia clicked up too, but
Big Ten might be the best conference this year, and I'm not just saying that.
No, I think top to bottom they're a lot. I think your average Big Ten teams are a lot better than your average SEC
I want to
teams.
see Arkansas in SEC play a little bit because I think Arkansas, as much crap as we talk about Texas for absolutely laying down in Fayetteville last week, I think Arkansas might be kind of legit. Just based on the fact that they can run the ball really, really well, and Sam Pittman's got those guys going in the trenches. But let's move on a little bit. My second loser, we don't have to talk about quite as much because we've already covered a decent amount of it. But the Pac-12 late at night. Last week was a death sentence for the Pac-12. Not only did Clay Helton get fired, which then, of course, USC comes out and beats Washington State 45-14, but then Fresno State late night beats UCLA. BYU comes out and beats Arizona State a week after beating Utah late at night. Northern Arizona helps to continue the nation's longest losing streak, which lives in the Pac-12. You guessed it. And not to mention, I don't think this one was late night, but Colorado, who played down to the wire against A&M. It was 10-7 in that game. Got beat 30-0 by Row the Boat.
And you're forgetting a game. You're forgetting a game too on there. Utah lost to San Diego State in triple overtime. So and it wasn't late night, but to add on to the pile of Pac-12 sucking,
it
that's
ended
another
up
game.
Going late night. It wasn't like
that's true. Yeah,
night, but it ended up going late night because it was 3 overtimes and it was on.
I wish I had watched that game. I didn't watch the end of that. I'm sorry that I didn't. That was a lot of fun, but again, painful for the Pac-12. But no, you're right. The Pac-12 was
sucks this year. So
I mean, even Cal played Sacramento State and let Sacramento State put up 30 on them. They still won the game, but you're letting Sacramento State put up 30 on you. I mean, no, it's
Vanderbilt put up 23 points on Stanford, which may not seem like a lot, but have you watched Vanderbilt football? That team lost to ETSU.
It's just sad.
The Pac-12 is dead.
At least Oregon State looked decent against Idaho, so good work, Oregon State.
I wish TCU would join this conference just to dominate it.
I wouldn't mind.
Just to get that playoff spot. Dominate.
And my final
West rivalries and dominate.
Oh, very true. My final, which I won't. This will be pretty quick. My final loser on this one, and I hate to dog on him, but Michael Penix Jr. Penix was the guy we really thought was going to be the guy last year, and he's been not the worst. But then they played Cincinnati, and he was kind of the worst. I mean, watching this game was bad. And Penix did get a couple of scores and over 200 yards, but he was 17 for 40 and 3 interceptions. He was just slinging the ball anywhere he could. It was just hard to watch. And I get that Cincinnati was still in a relatively close game with this team. In fact, was losing a little bit, losing at halftime, down actually 14-0 early in the game. But fourth quarter was 15-0 Cincinnati. It was a 38-24 win for the Bearcats, which, again, they keep looking good too. But, yeah, IU was just a whole mess in this game. And they're a team that's sort of struggling. And I actually have my stats in here on my GTD article. I'll pull it up just to bring it to you what his stats from the season, but it ain't good. Yeah, right here I got it. And so Penix in these first few games, he's thrown for 448 yards, 4 touchdowns, 6 picks, and a QBR of 31.8 on the season with 3 full games played. And with the 2 good games, like the Iowa-Cincinnati games, those combined, those were all 6 of the picks and 2 touchdowns. It's not good. It's terrible. And so there's a reason why this Indiana team's not back. They're not going to be any kind of threat remotely in the Big Ten East. That spot obviously belongs to Penn State against Ohio State this year, and a lot Michigan State too. And, maybe even Michigan can make some noise. Who knows? But those 4 clearly run the conference run the division at least as usual. And Indiana's just going to sink back down to just sort of being regular old Indiana. But, probably won't be talking about IU very much this season, but that's just the point I'll bring up about Penix. I hate to see it, though.
Negatory. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to my last loser because we've got a couple more games that we want to talk about here. But Spencer Rattler is my last loser because I told you, I don't think Spencer Rattler is that good. I think he's a spotty decision maker. I think his legs bail him out of a lot of plays. And I haven't seen any sort of decision making from him, that quick trigger, that intense knowledge of the offense, the ability to read a defense, that would show me that he's going to be a good NFL quarterback. And I bet a lot of NFL evaluators are saying the same. Last week, and this is an Oklahoma offense, mind you. This is an Oklahoma offense that we've grown accustomed to them throwing the ball wherever they want, all over the field, averaging 9 yards per attempt and absurd stats like that. And Spencer Rattler, though he completed 70% of his passes, so the accuracy and the arm talent is there, as we've talked about. Only 6.3 yards per attempt. He had 214 yards in the game, only 1 touchdown, and not much on the ground from him either. He was able to scramble a little bit, had 1 touchdown through the air and then 1 touchdown on the ground. But in the Big 12, that's not going to get it done. That is not going to get it done. I mean, we see some high-flying offenses in the Big 12. This is not news to anybody, but that's not going to get it done. I think Oklahoma could be very susceptible this year based on the fact that Spencer Rattler just hasn't been the Heisman quarterback that a lot of people thought he would be.
Still got a lot of season left to go, but that's still, the window is tightening very quickly.
Correct.
Now on to our top games of the week. Most of them we ended up covering, but the one big one we haven't really touched on a lot yet was probably the big marquee game of the weekend, and that was Alabama-Florida. I know we really haven't talked a lot of SEC besides, of course, the Ole Miss conversation, and Auburn too. But the big game here was this game, and this game proved, I think, a lot of things because it was a game that we didn't really see coming of Florida being very competitive and actually coming back. Alabama had this game under control. First quarter was 21-3, and we all were kind of going, oh, okay, and turning off the TV or changing it over. But then Florida crawled back. Touchdown with a PAT failed, made it 21-9 at halftime, and then 2 more scores, and with the Bama touchdown as well. It was a 5-point game going to the fourth quarter. And we were all going, wait a minute, they're making it a game. And then it was 3-6 for Florida in the fourth quarter to make it a 2-point game and almost came in on the final drive. And Alabama, of course, closed it out with the win. But this was still a pretty impressive game. Florida came out and really played very, very well. It was a pretty clean game, too, just 1 turnover on the day, and that was Florida. But, again, this game being in the swamp with a Florida team that is, we didn't think was going to be all big this year, but has played really well so far. I personally did not really expect this game to be like some kind of colossal blowout, no contest kind of game, but I don't really think many people called that it was going to be a 2-point game. So that was what was pretty shocking here. And the question, of course, is this more on Alabama not really being the number 1 clear, no contest best team in the country, or is it more that Florida actually does have a lot more fight in them than we thought they did?
I think it's a little bit of a combination of both, and I don't think that's necessarily a cop-out answer because Florida had an incredible game plan for attacking this Alabama defense. They wrote the book on how you should attack this defense this year with the way that they're set up and the talent that they have. They attacked them on the perimeter the whole game and used their speed to match Alabama's speed. And this is one of the few teams in the country that they can truly say that their athleticism and their speed, maybe not the talent and technique always in every situation, just because of the nature of Alabama's recruiting, but their talent and their athleticism and speed is on par with Alabama. And Georgia can say the same. And so they were able to attack the perimeter versus Alabama and then use that to counter to attack on the inside. Even though, as I said earlier, Emory Jones wasn't particularly effective through the air, only 17 of 27 for 194 yards and an interception, Florida did whatever they wanted against Alabama on the ground. Ran the ball 43 times, 246 yards, 4 touchdowns. And I mean, I could not be more impressed with the way that Florida handled themselves in this game. And I'm scared for Bama, not only against Ole Miss because of the athleticism that they have on the perimeter and the way that they can attack the boundaries, but if they have to play Georgia in the SEC championship, good luck running on Georgia if you can't run on Florida. Alabama only had 91 yards on the ground, and they were only able to go for 240 through the air. So they were really limiting the big plays, Florida was. And I mean, past the first quarter, Alabama's offense really stalled out. Uncharacteristic also for Nick Saban's team to have 11 penalties, 75 yards.
That's unusual.
Penalties.
Yeah.
Florida stayed pretty disciplined, but I mean, to give the Florida crowd some credit, it was loud in the swamp. That was
which you'd figure
hostile environment where everyone in the stadium hates you and wants you to false start, and they gave up a few of them. Very uncharacteristic from Bama. We'll see if they come in and get it corrected because, as Nick Saban said, every time they get up, every time the media starts hyping them up, it's just rat poison. So we'll see if a little bit of criticism in a tough game can bring these boys back.
Well, they got Southern Miss next week, and that should work for them. Alabama's 15-1 in their last 16 meetings against Southern Miss. I think it was the 07 season, may have been when they lost. I'm not totally sure on that. But my 2 points on this game before we can move on to some pain Olympics. But Agony Olympics, sorry. We have Bryce Young looked wonderful in this game. 240 yards, 3 touchdowns. Love to see what his production was here. And even Robinson, too. Brian Robinson Jr. had a good day on the ground. The Alabama offense still did a lot of what they wanted to do. Bryce Young, again, looked very, very good here. Biggest concern about Bama, too, was the pass rush. Emory Jones could do a lot of what he wanted in this game, and I was a little bit worried about how they're going to do on that. And he did, and that made it a little more difficult. So, again, we'll see this Bama team next week against Southern Miss. That'll be a good way to kind of get how can they do again against a smaller team like that. I expect them to go absolutely berserk on them. That should happen, but it shouldn't be too difficult. One more note I wanted to point out before we move on to Pain Olympics real quick, but wanted to point out. I was once again working the Syracuse game this weekend when Syracuse faced off against Albany, the capital of New York and home of the Great Danes of Albany, a small FCS school out of the CAA conference. And wanted to shout out Sean Tucker, who actually ended up making a second team All ACC Player of the Week for this week. And he ended up finishing the game with 13 carries for 132 yards and 4 touchdowns, with 3 receptions for 121 yards and a touchdown. Most of that was in the first half. He got 100 in the first half, making him the first Syracuse player ever to get 100 rushing and 100 receiving yards in a game, and he did it in a half. And mind you, Syracuse had guys like Jim Brown, and I mean, we've had some big-time running backs here. Nobody's done that before. So Sean Tucker, I think he's a true sophomore. A lot have been calls for him to wear legendary number 44. That's the big number in Syracuse. That's like the big deal time if you're able to wear that. So some calls for him to wear it already. But, yeah, Syracuse's rushing attack has looked really good so far this season. Even in their loss to Rutgers, Syracuse's rushing has been very solid. And I'm excited to see them against Liberty this Friday night. It'll be a fun game. Liberty kind of a sneaky team too. Winning some solid games, but not really playing a lot of big competition. But, of course, last year had their breakout season, so we'll see what they'll do. They actually play Ole Miss later in November, so that'll be a really fun game once we get to that. But on to some Agony Olympic games. We talked about the ACC being terrible. Well, it looks like that continues here. We skipped out on a few teams, and one of those was Pitt, who lost to Western Michigan at home. 44 points for the Broncos in Heinz Field, which is pretty embarrassing for Pittsburgh. So hate to see that for them. I mentioned Colorado, Minnesota, which you mentioned earlier, 30-0, which is, just how it is. Louisiana Tech has been on this painful list twice now, with losing to Mississippi State on the game-winning field goal and then losing to SMU on an insane Hail Mary play. That was unfortunate to see, but also made me a little happy because it meant that TCU could break the unbeaten streak. So that at least makes me a little happier that would be more painful for SMU if the Frogs win this weekend. What else?
We forgot the big one.
No, we're saving that for last.
Okay.
We're saving that for last. Duke actually beat a team. Duke beat a team, and it was Northwestern. So the same team that won the Big Ten West lost to Duke in a span of less than a year.
How did we get so lucky to have Stanford, Vanderbilt, and Duke Northwestern on the same weekend?
I mean, we got Vanderbilt, Colorado State last weekend, which is pretty much just as bad. So it's we got to get some painful games in here. I also mentioned the Northern Arizona loss, which was just pathetic. But the big game of the weekend, which I actually didn't include this team on losers simply because there was nothing new to say. Everything I already said last week was the exact same. But it was Florida State. They did it again. Florida State lost again, and this time was to Wake Forest, and it was not competitive. 35-14. Florida State gets bodied in North Carolina in a game that was not even close. I mean, it was 24-7 at one point, 10 straight points from the Demon Deeks to close out the game. It was just absolutely embarrassing. And for the first time since 1976, which was Bobby Bowden's first year, may he rest in peace, FSU was 0-3. The Florida State Seminoles, I don't even think have hit rock bottom yet, because here's the thing. Florida State plays Louisville next week, who's been getting better. Then Syracuse, then at North Carolina, UMass, which, okay, they'll win that, at Clemson, NC State, Miami, at Boston College, at Florida. Nearly every one of those games is losable.
It's not guaranteed that they're going to win any of those games.
Syracuse has looked better. Syracuse has actually looked better this year.
This is all I'm going to say because I don't, those kids try hard. They're just kids. They're younger than we are.
Yeah, we don't hate any of the kids. We're just hating on the team.
But you know who's older than us and is completely there for criticism? Mike Norvell, who I was praising before the season. And he's been terrible. This team has no heart. And he's only in year 2. And, I mean, call the boosters up. See if you can get some more buyout money. Or else you're going to be seeing a lot more people, reading books in the nosebleeds of those games. And a lot less people in the stands. And that program is going to lose a lot of money.
And if you're getting Florida State fans to start reading books, it's getting bad.
Wow. That was a low blow.
But that's going to do it there for Agony Olympics. The only other note I'm going to put on here before we close up is just a little bit mentioning of the top 25 poll. A couple of teams to highlight on here was BYU moving up 8 spots to number 15. Arkansas going up 4 to 16. Michigan up 6. We mentioned them before, number 19. And then UCLA moving down 9 to number 24 after their loss. Not ranked teams coming to the polls. Michigan State up to number 20. Fresno State at 22. And then Kansas State sneaking in at number 25. Very interesting team. And for the third week in a row, TCU was left out of the polls despite being up the top. Actually, 2 weeks now, TCU has been the number 1 receiving votes team and not gotten in. They remain that this week. After them is Liberty, Virginia Tech, Oklahoma State, and Maryland. And then your teams that were knocked out were Virginia Tech, Arizona State, and Miami. So that's going to close it here on the Blanket Coverage Podcast on our differently styled episode we'll start doing now of our college football recap day. We will be back tomorrow with all of our NFL action from this past weekend, including our Thursday night football preview, which is once again a super not exciting game, but we'll get excited for it anyway, and we'll get our picks in, and we'll still watch the game no matter what. So there is that. But that's all I've got here.
And that's all from me as well. Thank you so much for tuning in and for listening to the Blanket Coverage Podcast. I am Noah Parker.
And I'm Jack Wallace. Peace out, y'all.